And now, please welcome the No Bull Podcast.
No Bull, no Scotty, no Pippen, no Michael, no Jordan, no Bull. No Bull, yeah, no Bull.
Hi, this is Chuck Swirsky, and you're listening to No Bull AUK, Chicago Bulls podcast.
What's happening, people? Welcome back to another episode of No Bull, a UK Chicago Bulls podcast with me, Gimme from UK Chicago Bulls. My guest, wow, if you're watching YouTube, you can see him there. It's a big guest. I'm so excited to have him on. He's big in Bulls Nation, and his name is Mark Schanowski. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. Honestly, I honestly really appreciate your time, and it's great of you to come on and give me your time in this busy time for you, coming out of Summer League and etc. But I really appreciate it. So thank you. I can see you got your Give Me the Hot Sauce tea on there, which is awesome.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, we're having a lot of fun doing that. Of course, I know that all the fans of your show are very familiar with Stacey King. He's one of a kind in terms of TV analyst in the NBA. He brings so much passion and humor to the job. And we do a show every week called Gimme the Hot Sauce, which is one of Stacey's favorite catchphrases. And we encourage all your listeners to check it out. We have a number of NBA guests, past and present. And Stacey, of course, is a great storyteller. So hopefully, in addition to watching and listening to your show, they'll check us out as well.
Absolutely, I'm sure they already do. If they haven't been, then they've been missing out. It's a great podcast, like Mark says. Everyone that knows Stacey knows how good of a storyteller he is. We've touched on it so many times on this podcast too. He actually told a great one when I was in Chicago, Mark, and you mentioned to Stacey about my lift home with Will, and he went off on his story when I met him that time, and it was my girlfriend was listening to it as well, and she was like, "What were you doing?" Like, she made me sound like this crazy lunatic that was just charging at it. And I had to try and then convince my girlfriend that it wasn't quite as scary as that. But he's
Right.
brilliant, and he does put you in the room when he tells a story, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of the best, and we've had so much fun doing the show. We've done it about 2.5 years now, and we're still going strong. So we have a lot of fun with that. I've had a chance to call some of the Bulls games with Stacey, and that's been a really unique experience, filling in for Adam Amin on occasion on the TV broadcasts. And it's just been, we've had a friendship going back to when Stacey was playing for the Bulls in the early 90s, and just being able to carry that relationship over until today has been fantastic. And it's been able to keep me close to the game that I love and the Chicago Bulls. So the podcast kind of goes hand in hand with covering Bulls basketball from day to day, and it's really a great tool in terms of being able to talk to different people around the NBA and get their input not only on the Bulls but on what's going on around the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he quite often jokes about, obviously, when Neil Funk stepped down, about all the people that were potentially going to join Stacey and host, and he quite often jokes that you were like the 17th person in the running or something
Right.
or other.
Right. That's done with love. Stacey and I have a
sure.
good friendship. And, the reality of it is, Jimmy, that I had little to no play-by-play experience, and I basically begged for a shot. There were guys coming in from all over the country that had pretty impressive resumes in terms of the amount of play-by-play they've done, both at the professional and the college level. And I'm just a guy who's loved basketball all his life and watched, thousands of games. And, you always think when you watch a game that you could do that. And it's not quite as easy as you think, but the fact that I've been close to the Bulls for the last 30 plus years and know Stacey so well made it a lot easier. And, for a guy who's a relative novice, I think I held my own.
Oh, absolutely. I think you did fantastic. I mean, if anybody honestly thinks they can do it, I challenge them to try, because I don't even think I could. I mean, it's hard enough, I'd imagine, when the game's flowing and it's a close game and there's not to talk about. I mean, how they fill the spaces when there's a blowout win or a blowout loss, and you've got to find something to talk about when there's really not much to talk about on court. It's it's a talent for sure. I mean, I had Chuck on last year, Chuck Swirsky, and obviously over here we don't really listen to the games on the radio broadcast so much because we watch them on League Pass, so we get Stacey and Adam, or Stacey and yourself, or whoever else might be stepping in. But I was driving back from somewhere one Sunday evening, so it would have been an afternoon Chicago game. So obviously I couldn't watch it because I was driving. I managed to find the radio broadcast, and it was actually the first time I'd listened to. Obviously, I'm well aware of Chuck and how talented he is, and I'd listened to clips and stuff. But it was the first time I'd listened to the live game of a radio call in basketball, and it's crazy how him and Bill Wennington do that. Honestly, I mean, the TV one's hard enough, right? But the radio one, they're having to. It's not just about calling the game; they're having to put people in there, and for such a fast-paced game, I
Yeah,
don't know how they do it.
that's definitely an art, and the listener is totally at your mercy. You could tell them anything that you
Yeah,
wanted, and they would believe you. So you're trying to construct a word image of what's going on, and the listener is creating that, translating that in their own minds. So basketball is such a fast-paced game. To describe, where the ball is moving at every time and player movement on the court, it's definitely an art form, and that the guys that do radio play-by-play, are some of the most talented in this business.
yeah, I completely agree. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. Well, listen, props to you because you certainly never come across as somebody who had no play-by-play experience. So, yeah, fair play to you. You're obviously a bit of a natural with it. So, going back to the podcast, we got a shout out Timmy Whispers as well, who's a pretty big part of the Gimme the Hot Sauce podcast as well. And his impression of, oh God, the actor, you're gonna have to remind me his name.
Christopher Walken.
Yes, is so good. I actually cannot listen to Timmy now without hearing his impression, and it's still weird now every time I listen to. It's because I've missed quite a few episodes, so I have to listen back and so, and I still can't listen to Timmy now without hearing that impression. So yeah, it's pretty good to be fair.
Well, we've had a professional impressionist from Ireland by the name of Al Foran on our show 3 times.
Yes.
And the last time we had him on, we had Tim do the Christopher Walken, and Al also does that impersonation, and Tim's is better.
Yeah.
So I think Al was kind of taken aback that here's a guy that is a businessman for a living is beating him at his own game. But that's just one impression. I mean, Al is incredibly talented. For people who haven't had a chance to check him out, he is just an amazing talent.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm terrible with impressions, so I wouldn't even attempt it. But yeah, it's a great impression anyway. Mark, Summer League's just finished. You obviously call the Windy City Bulls games with Will Perdue, of course, and you've seen the lights of Javon Freeman Liberty. Um, we're going to touch on Carlik Jones as well. I know you're high on him. We spoke about him when we met in Chicago, but let's speak about JFL first. He showed
I thought he
up.
was fantastic. Yeah, he was great in the summer league. He made the second team all summer league, and remember at that tournament in Las Vegas, all 30 teams are represented. So he was considered one of the 10 best players to show out during the 5 games that each team played. I thought he was tremendous. I saw a lot of that skill set during the G League games with the Windy City Bulls, but he almost took it to another level in summer league in terms of improving his outside shooting. I believe he shot 46 or 47% from beyond the arc. And that was the one thing that you kind of wondered, could he be a consistent 3-point shooter at the NBA level? He showed that his skill package can really translate. And, the funny thing about professional basketball is that for the guys, 15-man rosters on NBA teams, so you 30 times 15, that's 450. When you go to the G League and add in all those guys, those guys are just looking for the opportunity. It's not that they're inferior players, many of them. It's just that they weren't in the right set of circumstances. Maybe they were drafted or went to camp with the wrong team and they got cut. But there are any number of guys in the G League who could easily be contributors at the NBA level. They're just waiting for that opportunity. And I think Javon Freeman Liberty falls into that category. He has NBA skills. He just needs the right situation to be able to show them off.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you were pretty much bang on. You said 47% from three. It was 46.2 off of 5.2 attempts, which is, I mean, that's impressive, right? And that's just exactly what the Bulls need is a decent 3-point shooter. Am I right in thinking he didn't start a single game for the Windy City Bulls last season?
Yeah, he was coming off the bench, which is kind of
Yes.
unusual when you consider his abilities. But what happens with a lot of the G League teams is, they run the same offense as the NBA squad that they're affiliated with. And the front office of the NBA team will act in concert with the general manager of the G League squad. And they'll kind of dictate which players that they want to be featured. And I don't know that they necessarily will dictate a rotation into how the minutes are dispersed. But I think that with Javon Freeman Liberty, they looked at him as a guy that could come off the bench and provide instant offense. There were times where Dalen Terry was assigned to play with Windy City. Of course, Carlik Jones wound up being the G League MVP. But they also had Marko Simonovic, who they wanted to develop. At the beginning of the season, they had Giannis Antetokounmpo's younger brother Kostas was on the squad, and they were kind of dictating, these are the guys we want to take a long look at. And JFL kind of fell through the cracks. But as the season went on, he kept getting stronger and stronger. His averages was approaching the 20-point mark in the months of like January and February. But then he had a knee injury, which wasn't serious, but it was serious enough to cost him the rest of the G League season. And that may have taken him off the radar a little bit in terms of planning. But fortunately, they didn't include him on the Summer League roster. And now you may have a situation, Jimmy, when they get to training camp in early October, where Carlik Jones and Freeman Liberty are competing for one roster spot.
I think you could be right. I mean, he definitely showed up, and like you said, he took a leap from what he was doing with the Windy City before the injury. Certainly did in his numbers anyway. So it was a great shout including him in that summer league team. I mean, yeah, let's go back to the G League. We got a chance to speak after the game that I was at back in December, and you said this is probably the second best league in the world, right? Okay, you've got your European leagues that are pretty strong at times, but people look down on the G League. It's not. I was surprised how empty the arena was, because it's a great arena there, and I know it's out of town and what have you, but I was, one, surprised how big the arena was, but two, surprised how empty it was. Was that just kind of bad timing on my part? Is there normally more fans than that there, or is that kind of just how it is?
It kind of depends on the day of the week. They get better draws on the weekend than they do on weeknight games, which is only to be expected because people have to get up for work the next day and things like that. Obviously, the ticket prices are much lower than what they are for an NBA game, but they average, I would say, in the range of about $2,000 to $3,000, or 2,000 to 3,000 fans per night, and that arena holds about 7,000 or 8,000. So it does look very empty at times. And some of the weeknight games, you can almost hear the broadcasters talking, as the players are coming up and down the court. So they're working on it, and I think that's an issue surrounding the G League, is that a lot of these games are played in non-NBA arenas, and sometimes it's tough to get the fans to come out. Plus, the Windy City Bulls didn't field a team during the whole COVID year, where they had the one season where they only played, I believe it was 20 or 25 games in a bubble in Orlando, and Windy City didn't play at all that year. So they were kind of off the radar for fans, and they're building it back up, and I think it's going to continue to improve, because there used to be a stigma when you were playing for the G League, when you were an NBA player who was assigned to play there, that you were being punished or being demoted. Now you see a number of first-round picks who are not in the rotation for their NBA teams will play for the G League squads, and it's not considered a punishment anymore. It's just considered an opportunity for them to showcase their skills, and maybe showing up that they can earn another opportunity to crack the rotation with the NBA squad.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, these guys, they believe they're the best, right? They wouldn't be where they are if they didn't. So I guess for them to have to, if they're in the NBA and have to step down to the G League, I guess that is a bit of almost a reality check for them, probably one they don't particularly want to do. But for somebody like Carlik Jones, for example, using that as a platform to get into the NBA, I guess they've probably got a slightly different mentality towards it, whereas they're out there working their butts off every night to try and get noticed, to make that next step up. But yeah, I mean, I was impressed. I thought it was a really good night out. I think I had courtside seats. I think I paid something like $60 for them, may have even been less. It certainly wasn't expensive for a courtside row A seat. And it was a really good night. Whether you were, I mean, I was on my own for that trip, but whether you were on your own, in a couple, with a family, there was a few families there. They had stuff
Hmm.
Going on the whole game, which kids could do, the kids zone area, which was fantastic. So if you haven't been to a Windy City game, I strongly recommend going. It's such a good night out or day out, however you want to look at it. Yeah, you've got to do it 100%. It's good. And like Mark said, the quality of basketball is very, very good. Probably a lot better than what people think, to be honest.
Yeah, and Dalen Terry, who was the first round pick for the Bulls a year ago, he sought out the opportunities to play with Windy City. I mean, he was very frustrated that he was not in the rotation with the NBA team. And rather than pouting and saying, well, I'm not getting an opportunity, the coach isn't fair, and all that kind of stuff, he said, hey, let me go down to the G League and play and show what I can do. And he played it. He played, I think, like 6 to 8 games, and he showed that he's got some potential to be an NBA rotation player down the line. And I think that you're going to see that with more and more teams, especially like the contending teams who draft between 20 and 30. The kids that they pick late in the first round most likely aren't going to play for them.
No.
So let them play with the G League. Let them get 50 games under their belt. It's much better than just going through practices and sitting at the end of the bench during games, because the reality of it is now in today's NBA, teams don't practice that hard anymore. It'd be rare when they have 2 or 3 days between games where they can really get into a scrimmage situation. Most of the time, they're just walking through things and talking about the next opponent coming up. And so for guys who aren't in the rotation, the only way to keep their conditioning is up is they'll play 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 with other bench players at the after practice to try to keep their wind up. Otherwise, they're really not getting a lot of conditioning work.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that, 100%. That's just Dalen Terry all over, though, isn't it? I think that's just his energy. It's just his mentality. He's a fun guy, isn't he? I mean, I was lucky enough to meet him that game at the Windy City that I went to. I met him before the game, and he's just constantly smiling. That's not an act, is it? That's just Dalen Terry all over.
Yeah, and he thinks that he's ready to play in the NBA right now. As you mentioned earlier, if you're going to make that level of success in any sport, you have to have that belief in yourself, that confidence, almost cockiness, that you can compete and get the better of just about anybody. His big hang up, as we all know, is his outside shooting. He has to improve that. And until he can develop a more consistent outside shot, he'll probably find himself on the outside looking in terms of the Bulls rotation. Looking ahead to next season, we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with Ayo Dosunmu, whether he's going to be brought back or not. But they pretty much have a 9-man rotation already set. If they do go out in the marketplace and bring in another big, there's been talk today that they might be interested in trying to sign either Christian Wood or PJ Washington. If they would bring in a player like that, well, Dalen Terry's completely blocked out then the top 10 players on the roster. And again, he would probably seek out opportunities to play at Windy City in order to be able to get some full court, high speed, close to NBA competition.
Yeah, I mean, he's still young enough to it's not over for him if he doesn't make the rotation in the next year, 2, 3 years. He's still young enough to get, like you say, get the reps at the G League under his belt, and then these players can improve. Let's not kid ourselves. Oh, he had one bad summer league. He's a bust. That's not how life works. And let's be honest, he played very well in the 5th game, Dalen Terry. Okay, he didn't have a great the first 3 or 4 games. He didn't play particularly well. I don't know whether it's nerves or trying too hard, which can happen. And there's still plenty of time. People calling players busts at 19, 20 years old is crazy to me. But speaking of which, let's talk about Carlik Jones. I know he's a bit older. I think he's 25 years old now. We spoke about him last December again when we met at the Windy City game, and this is before he got the Bulls contract, of course. And you were high on him, and you said he's going to be in the NBA. He's going to get an NBA contract. I mean, that game alone I watched, he was fantastic. I mean, he fell to the floor, still managed to get his arm on the ball and make an assist. I mean, he never gave up on any play. I thought he was brilliant. I watched a few Windy City games on telly as well. I'm high on him, even now. I know he had a little bit of a chance with the Bulls, kind of, in the garbage time. I think I put those performances down to nerves. And again, like we just said with Dalen, trying a bit too hard. I guess you're still high on him, right? I know a lot of people are saying he's not good. He's not good enough for the NBA. He's a G Leaguer. I don't agree with that. I still think he's got the potential to be an NBA player.
Well, the problem for Carlik Jones and so many small guards in professional basketball is you've already got two strikes against you when you walk into training camp. They look at your stature and go, you can't defend on the NBA level. And that's something that Carlik Jones and any player who's in the 5'11" to 6'2" range has got to prove that he can hold up physically, because in half court sets, you're always having, a big player setting a screen that you've got to either navigate your way around it or work through it. And if you can't show that you can defend your position, and you're opening up straight line drives for the opponents to get into the paint and disrupt your defense, coach won't have a lot of confidence to put you out on the court. There are also situations where more and more teams now will post up their guards rather than their bigs. And if you can't hold up defensively, again, they don't want you out there. The Bulls have a lot of guards that have good size. Alex Caruso, of course, made first team all defense. You've got Zach LaVine, who's about 6'5", 6'6". When Lonzo Ball was playing, he was 6'5", 6'6". They had a big backcourt. And I think most teams prefer guards who can hold up one-on-one defensively. And I think that's the big question mark about Carlik Jones. Can he play defense on the NBA level? Because we know he can score. He had a couple of 40-point games playing for Windy City. He was the most valuable player in the G League. You would think that alone would have a lot of teams curious about bringing him in. He didn't play in Summer League because he had an injury, so that's why he wasn't with the Summer League squad. But he'll be ready to go for training camp.
I thought the reason he didn't play was his age. I thought you had to be below 25.
No, there's no age restriction. Normally, it's kind of an unwritten rule that after your second year in the NBA, you don't play anymore in the G League. But we've had older players who are trying to come back that have gone down to play in Summer League to try to rehabilitate their value and get some executives to take a look at him. So Carly could have played. He just was dealing with a minor injury. That's why he wasn't there.
Do you know what? Yeah, I'm talking nonsense, because didn't Malcolm Hill play last year in the Summer League? I think he may have done.
Yeah, he did.
So, I'm talking nonsense. I don't know why I thought that.
We've seen 10-year veterans come down to Summer League just trying to get one more bite at the apple.
Yeah, I don't know why I thought that. I had it in my head for some reason it was an age thing. But yeah, I didn't realize it was I hope it's not a bad injury to Carlik, no?
No, he's supposed to be ready for training camp. And, right now he's got on a non-guaranteed contract. So he's signed up for this year. I believe there's a date early in the season where they either have to guarantee the rest of his contract for next season or let him go. So there's nothing that needs to be done in the coming couple of months with Carlik Jones. He's clear to report to training camp and compete. Right now, he's technically on the roster. Teams can come to training camp with 20 players, so he will be one of those 20. And they could have him on the roster to start the season. And if they decide, let's say 2 months in, that they want to bring in another big player, they could waive him and not be responsible for the rest of his contract for that season.
I guess they can't put him on a two-way contract now. They
could.
Oh, they could still do that. Okay.
They would have to convert it though. They would have to waive him from his standard NBA contract and get him to sign a two-way. So right now the Bulls have two of their two-way slots committed. They changed the rule this year, and you can carry three two-way players now. So Adama Sanogo, the big man who helped Connecticut win the National College Championship last year, is on a two-way contract. And Justin Lewis, who was a guy they were very excited about signing last summer, and then he unfortunately suffered an ACL tear and missed all of last season. And then he sprained his ankle in Summer League after one game. They feel like he has the potential to be an NBA player, but if you can't stay healthy, of course, ultimately that's not going to work out. And the two-way things are not guaranteed. We saw during the course of last season, guys were cut off two ways and somebody else was brought in. So, as they move closer to the start of the season, if they decide that either Sanogo or Justin Lewis aren't showing what they'd like to see, they could just waive them and sign somebody else to one of those two-way slots.
I would love to see JFL get one. I think most people would. I mean, listen, we know it's Summer League, okay? So we're not saying that that's gonna go over to the NBA, but he earned it for me, right, in that Summer League. I think he was robbed getting in the second team. I think he should have been in the first team personally, but maybe that's a bit Bulls bias from my part. But I would love to see him get an opportunity. I really, really would.
He's got that speed that very few players possess. I mean, his end-to-end ability it ranks up there with some of the best players in the league. He can grab a rebound and be down the court in a flash and create easy baskets in transition. The Bulls really struggled to score last year, and they missed with the fast break opportunities that Lonzo Ball had brought to the team. I'm not saying that Javon Freeman Liberty is going to take the league by storm, but I think in a reserve situation, coming off the bench and being a change of pace kind of player, I think that he could be of value, not just to the Bulls, but to any number of NBA teams. You look at the second unit, particularly if Kobe White winds up starting at point guard, they're going to be looking for some scoring with that second group. And he's a guy that maybe could provide some of that, because if you're going to have Javon Carter and Caruso and Andre Drummond and Torrey Craig on that second group, you might be looking for somebody that can provide a little more offensive burst.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that, who would you start at point guard going into the season off of what we know currently? Would you go with Kobe or would you go with Javon Carter?
I just think in terms of trying to create the most dynamic squad over 48 minutes, I would start Javon Carter. People think of him as a guy that when he came out of college, he went to West Virginia as a defensive specialist, and the knock on him was that he wasn't a good shooter. Well, through hard work, he's developed into a very good three-point shooter. He shot 42% on threes last year with an excellent Milwaukee team on a pretty high number of attempts. So he, through hard work, has really improved his outside shooting to the point where he could be a decent off-ball threat playing with Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, and even Vooch if you dump the ball in the post and he's looking for a cross-court pass to an open shooter. That way, you could put Kobe White with the second unit and use his dynamic ability, his speed in the open court, and his three-point shooting to go with Caruso on the second unit. I think that might be better balance, but ultimately, they'll make that decision after the preseason games to decide, what's the best rotation they could go with. But I would say right now, if I had to handicap it, I would think Javon Carter will start at point guard and Kobe will be your sixth man.
That would be how I would go with it as well. I mean, when we signed Javon Carter, I think it was Sean from he runs the UK Milwaukee Bucks account, and he messaged me and said, "You're going to love this dude. Like he's going to be a real fan favorite." And I know the Bucks fans were really, really disappointed to see him leave. I would definitely start Javon Carter personally. That said, I think nobody can deny the leap that Kobe made last year. I mean, I'm not going to lie. This time last year, I was almost written him off, as harsh as that may sound, even though what I just said about young players not writing them off stupid. I love Kobe the person. I know how hard he works. You see him behind the scenes. He works his butt off, and he stays late putting up shots and stuff after games. And it wasn't nothing against him personally. I just wasn't sure if he was ever going to cut it as an NBA point guard. I saw him more, if anything, as a shooting guard off the bench. But this past season, not only has he proved he's a very, very solid guard, he's shown he could be a point guard in this league, which I didn't think. I thought that ship had sailed, but he can be a legit point guard in this league, can't he? Starting potentially.
Well, he worked extremely hard at his ball handling because that was his biggest weakness. Last summer, he went to a private coach that helped him in terms of all of his abilities that you'd want to have in a good point guard, to be able to have a tight handle, make sure that you're not carelessly making errant passes or turning the ball over, because that was the biggest knock. His assist to turnover ratio wasn't that impressive his first couple of years in the league. And now through doing that work, he really impressed people with his ability to dribble through traffic, and he improved his ability to finish at the rim, which was below standard for the first couple of years. He went back to that same coach this summer. He's working again to continually improve his ball handling and his decision making as a point guard. And I think he's going to come to training camp with the idea that this is my job, and I'm going to do everything I can to win it. I think that Billy Donovan was skeptical of Kobe. Kobe and Zach LaVine are the only holdovers from the John Paxson, Gar Forman regime. And so, I think there was a natural feeling that, well, AK didn't draft Kobe White, so he's going to be moving on at some point. And I'm sure there were discussions about moving him over the last couple of years, but I think he showed enough last year that they're gonna really value what he can bring. I mean, they gave him a 3-year contract at a pretty good rate, close to $40 million. That showed that they have some confidence in him. And even if he doesn't start, he'll be playing, 28 to 30 minutes, and I'm sure he'll average in double figures for the Bulls in the upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. And he got his shot back as well, didn't he? His 3-point shot, because that was a bit sort of hit and miss at times. And that was worrying because that was what Kobe was mainly known for, is awesome ability from the 3-point line. And I mean, towards the end of the season, he was red hot from there. And in my opinion, if I've said this time and time again on this podcast, but if Billy Donovan keeps him in against Miami, we probably win that game because he was red hot. But I mean, listen, I'm not the coach. And we would probably be in a much worse position if I was, believe me, because I would be useless. But we're all great
Well,
from the sofa,
before
right?
we move on, I want to tell you a Kobe White story. We had a fan watch party for the 2019 draft lottery. That year, the Bulls had the fourth best odds to get the number one pick. Remember, that was the Zion Williamson draft,
Yeah.
the John Morant draft, who went second. And I remember thinking, this could be the thing that's going to turn the franchise around. I was personally of the belief I would have rather had John Morant than
Yeah.
Williamson, because
Same. Exactly the
I
same.
saw the weight issues, and I thought, this
Yeah.
guy might have trouble staying healthy in the league. And there also was a guard, but I thought, well, at least if they stay in the top four, which they were supposed to, they could get Darius Garland, who's also become an all-star player in Cleveland. So you had Zion, you had John Morant, you had RJ Barrett, who's had mixed results in New York, and Garland went fifth. So the Bulls fell from fourth to seventh. And as you can imagine, the tone of the party, the excitement of all the people at the bar watching the selections being run off, and when the Bulls card came up at number 7, that was pretty much the end of the party. People then were just drowning their sorrows more than enjoying a party.
I can imagine, but nobody should have been shocked because I think it was the third year in a row we got pick number 7, right? I believe.
Yep. Yeah, but this was
So
bad because they dropped so badly from 4 to 7. It's like this year's draft. Detroit had the worst record in the league, and they picked 5th.
yeah.
They were hoping that they were going to get Wembanyama, which would have been fantastic for the Pistons with all the young talent they have. But from a Bulls perspective, you're glad he's not in our division.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to the 2019 draft, I'm with you. I wanted the Bulls to get the second pick. I didn't want them to get the first pick
Yeah.
because I think whoever got the first pick, they had to go with Zion, right? You would have
Zion,
been
yeah.
crazy not to. But for me, I wanted Ja Morant. We were desperate for a point guard. We knew what he could do, and like you said, I was worried about Zion's injuries, and sadly, we've been proved to be right to be worried. And I get no pleasure in saying that because we want to see the best players playing, whether they play for your team or not, right? And we don't want them to not be playing because of injuries and or other off-court stuff. But as it turns out, Darius Garland was probably the safest pick of the bunch, right? He's the only one that's not controversial or been any
Yeah.
news, off-court news recently, or
Yeah, and Cleveland is going to be really good this year. I mean, that's a team that a lot of people are kind of forgetting about.
yeah.
They added some shooting. They got Max Strus, the former Windy City Bull, and Miami Heat, a player who really showed himself well this year in the postseason. He kind of shot the Bulls out of it with his great shooting in that play-in game, I should say. And they also signed George Niang, who's a good 3-point shooter, a forward from Philadelphia. So you add those two shooters to the mix that they have. People talk about, well, the Bulls are a play-in team, and it may ultimately end up that way. But if you look at the East, you've got Milwaukee and Boston, who are proven teams. Philadelphia, we don't know about James Harden, but you still anticipate they're going to be in the top 4. You've got Miami, who made it to the finals this last year. You've got a very good Cleveland team, and New York has made some improvements. So those are 6 teams right there that on paper look to be better than the Bulls. But I think that the Bulls could compete with New York, maybe for that 6th spot. Any higher than that, though, you'd have to have a lot of things go right, and maybe some things go wrong for those contending teams.
I have a real tough time ever admitting the Knicks are better than the Bulls.
Right.
They could have the best team in the league. They could have Nikola Jokic. They could have Giannis. They could have Luka or anyone else you want to name. I would refuse to say they were better than the Bulls because I'm very bitter towards the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they have Tom Thibodeau coaching over there, and he did a great job in getting them to the playoffs last year. They beat Cleveland in the first round before losing in round 2, and I'm sure that they're going to be back strong. I just think that the Bulls, with the additions they've made, They always have trouble staying healthy. Maybe this is the year they finally get blessed with some better health. I think they can be a team that could win in the 45 to 48 range if everything breaks right. And if they can get to that level, then they'll certainly be in contention to get one of those top 6 seeds and avoid the whole play-in tournament.
I believe the Vegas odds were released in the last week or two, and I think they had the Bulls over and under at, I want to say it was 37.5 or something, which I
Yeah, it's
felt
very
was
low.
quite low, to be honest. I mean, I know I'm optimistic, but I mean, hopefully we're better than that, right?
Well, and people forget that if you look at some of the underlying numbers from last year, the Bulls lost so many close games. Their records in, they call clutch games, and with 5 points or less spread in the last 5 minutes, their record was abysmal in that last year. Where the year before, when they made the playoffs, they did very well in close games. So just kind of a regression to the mean, or kind of maybe splitting the difference with that. I think you'll find a couple of victories there. And the additions of Carter and Craig, even though they're not attention grabbers around the league, those are exactly the kind of players they needed. Defensive guys who can defend in space and can shoot the three-pointer at a high level. As I mentioned, Carter was at about 42%. I believe Torrey Craig was at about 39%. So you're adding two guys who can make threes on a decent volume for a team that ranked last in the league in both three-point attempts and makes, and that's gonna make a difference. And I know that DeMar DeRozan has been working to expand his shooting range this summer. I just think that they're going to come back. Vooch now knows where he's going to be. He signed a 3-year contract. There's no uncertainty about will he be traded? Is he going to leave as a free agent? They know what the roster is going to look like. And I think that when they get to training camp, you're going to see a very hungry team that wants to prove, all the so-called experts wrong in terms of their forecast. Because I think that number in Vegas is very low, but it's based on the way they usually do things. They're trying to entice people to bet a certain way, and they set that number. The Lakers number was very low until they made all their offseason additions. I think they started out at about 42, and they're at about 46.5 now. So we may see that Bulls number creep up as we get closer to the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, now's the time to back it, in my opinion, if you are a
Yeah.
betting person, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like you just said, the last season to the season before, we struggled to close out the clutch games, whereas the season before we were better at it. Last season we were beating the good teams, losing to the bad teams. The season before was the opposite. Last season we didn't have a great start. After All-Star break, we went on a bit of a run. The season before was the opposite, right? We were second in the East
Right.
going into All-Star break and then completely fell off a cliff. I don't know how it was a complete flip in kind of every aspect. It was crazy. So if they can figure something out where something in the middle and balance that out a bit, we're talking at, I think a home court team, I think, is a real stretch. But like you just said, I think top 6 is realistic if they can stay healthy.
That's what you're looking at, because I think Miami's going to get Damian Lillard, which means
Do you think
there's
that's
going to
nailed
be
on? There's no way he's staying in Portland, no?
no, there's going to be 4 heavyweights in the East, and I think those 4 teams, I'm including Philadelphia in that. We don't know where James Harden's going to end up, but I think even if he is traded, I think they're going to come up with a deal that's going to get another quality performer in that slot. And I think that Tyrese Maxey is a very, very good young
Yeah.
player who's only going to get better once Harden and his dribble thing leaves town. So, I think Philadelphia could take a bit of a drop, but I'm still penciling them in the top 4. But if Miami gets Lillard, you're looking at Milwaukee, Boston, Miami as your top 3. Philadelphia is probably 4. Cleveland's 5. So, it's almost, you look at the Knicks, the Bulls, Atlanta, Brooklyn, those 4 teams are trying to play to avoid the play-in tournament.
Yeah. It's a scary division, that East now, isn't it? I mean, look, the West isn't much
Yeah.
easier, but I think the East is really probably, if any, I think it's probably overtaken it. I would actually love to see the All-Star go back to East and West. How do you feel about that, or do you like the current format?
Oh, I'm much in favor of East-West. I
Yeah.
hate the player draft thing. I know they were trying to do something to bring some juice to the game, thinking that, players, if they teamed up with their friends and the guys they liked in the league, that maybe they would play a little bit harder. The only thing that it seemed to bring a little spark was the whole Elam ending, where you have a target score. I think that's a good
Yes.
concept. I think the ideal concept, which we may see down the road, is have it North America versus international. That might be a good format, and we
Yeah,
could
I
maybe
like
just
that
make it
idea.
USA versus the world. That way, there's a handful of really good Canadian players. If you combine them with the Euros, you'd probably have a very, very competitive game.
Cool. Do you know, Embiid, Jokic, Giannis, Luca. That world
Luca,
team would
yeah,
be very special, and like you said, add the Canadians to that as well. Cool. Yeah, that would be some game for sure. Now, neither team would want to lose that game, right? Because you're not even just playing for your friends, you're not playing for your division, you're playing
right.
for your country. That I like that idea a lot, actually. Well, not your
Yeah, I
country,
think
but
they
your
could come up with some really competitive teams. Jamal Murray is Canadian,
yeah.
Andrew Wiggins. Um, there's a couple other guys I'm forgetting that could really make this an interesting format. And you mentioned some of the international guys with Jokic. It would be quite something to see that. I guess they'd have to fight over Joel Embiid, but he probably would be on the international squad as well, even though he has naturalized U.S. citizenship.
I love that idea. I think that's a great shout. Yeah, I would love to see that for sure. I think they need to do something because it's not taken seriously. You go back to the 90s and what have you, when Michael Jordan and stuff, they didn't, All-Star break wasn't a fun day out for them, was it? Those guys wanted to win.
Yeah, they did. They played hard. The game was a lot different. Now they're approaching almost 200 points for the winning team, and that's not really basketball. That's almost a
No.
mockery of the game.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually haven't watched the last couple of All-Star games
Hmm.
because I love All-Star Saturday. I think that's great fun. I'm a big fan of the three-point contest as well. Um, Shout out Sabrina, by the way, for the New York Liberty on the WNBA, who
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
smashed the three-point contest this past weekend. I mean,
yeah.
I think I've watched that video maybe 20 or 30 times, and I'm not bored of watching it. It's absolutely incredible what she did. It's seriously incredible, and it's put massive respect on the WNBA's name for all the haters out there, or all the people that refuse to give it a chance. Hopefully, that's well and truly put that league on the map.
Well, we may have the ultimate shootout with Steph Curry and Sabrina Ionescu, because Steph was very intrigued by that showing and gave him some motivation, probably to come into next year's 3-point contest, really doing a lot of practicing and trying to maybe get that record back. But you can't do much better than 25 out of 27.
No, and I would love to see them go head to head. I think that would be good
Yeah.
fun as well. So I think Steph's answer was just winning the golf tournament and smashing a hole in one at the weekend, which I saw. That was probably his answer from that to
Oh
take the
yeah.
limelight
Yeah.
away in typical Steph fashion.
He is an amazing, amazing athlete, and for him to be able to be so accomplished at golf is incredible. And there is pressure for those guys because they're around their peers, and most of the players in that event are retired athletes, but there are a number of current athletes that take part in that. And for him to get a hole in one and to make an eagle on the last hole to win the tournament, I
It's
mean, you talk about a
incredible.
clutch performer. That's not even his specialized sport. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy. Shout out Zach Levine as well, who was also in. I think it was the same tournament, right? That Zach was in. I guess it
Yeah, he
was.
struggled. He
Yeah, he
didn't do
didn't.
very well.
Somebody, I forget which Bulls player it was, when he was being interviewed, or Twitter or something, and said about Zach Levine going into this golf tournament, and he said, "Well, Zach sucks at golf, so he's not going to do very well there," or something. It was one of the current Bulls players. I forget who it was now, which was
Well, he
quite
finished
funny.
behind Charles Barkley. That's all you need to know.
Oh, did he really? Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
following it that closely. I obviously was watching Steph and stuff. You couldn't not because it was all over social media. Oh, he finished behind Charles, did he? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Chuck beat him. Oh God, that's tough to take.
He'll get some ribbing about that from NBA players who are golfers.
Yeah, I bet he will. Maybe Alex Caruso can enter next year because I've heard he's pretty handy at golf.
There's a lot of NBA guys have taken it up. I mean, they've got their summers off, so it's a great way to get out and enjoy some free time with friends.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Mark, one thing I wanted to touch on before I let you go. Actually, I was going to touch on Ethan Thompson as well, one of the Windy City Bulls, shooting guard, come off the bench a lot of the time, but he had good numbers last year as well for the Windy City Bulls. Do you see him getting a chance in the NBA or not yet?
I think it's going to be tough for him. You know, he is about 6'5", kind of a tweener in terms of whether he's a shooting guard or a small forward. NBA teams normally carry a bunch of wing players, but you have to have one skill that's just off the charts good, whether that being a lockdown defender or shooting in, better than 40% from 3-point range. And he's really not there in any of those categories. He's a very, very good G League player, a great guy. And I hope he gets the opportunity with some NBA team. But in terms of, guys who are on the cusp of making it to the league, I think he's probably a little bit further down the road. And he may ultimately try to look for an opportunity, whether that's in Europe or some other country, because as I'm sure you're aware, some of these leagues pay very good salaries
Yeah.
for American players to come over and compete.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Yago dos Santos has just gone to, oh gosh, the same team as
As Marko
Marko
Simonovic.
Simonovic, of course.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I actually really liked watching Yago dos Santos in summer league. I think he's really good fun. I would love to have seen the Windy City Bulls get him, because I think he was just great fun. One of those fun players to watch, and he could shoot lights out as well, couldn't he?
Yeah, he had a good run, and we're gonna miss Marco. He's a good guy, really hard worker. He's still only like about 22, 23 years old, and ultimately, I think his future is in European basketball. The physical play at both the NBA and G League levels was just too much for him. You could almost see the frustration
He's
on his
just not
face.
big
I mean,
enough, was he?
yeah, he put in the time in the weight room. I mean, he was a hard worker. It wasn't like he didn't care enough, or he didn't commit himself enough to weight training. He just, a very skilled player, good shooter, can run the court, a good athlete. But the physical thing just really took him out of his element. There were times where, even not just opposing centers, but even other forwards and guards would bump him and try to rough him up a little bit, and you could see they would mentally kind of take him out of the game.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, he was the one player that most of Bulls Nation, certainly on Twitter, were really rooting hard for.
Right.
Marco hours, they would call it. And I didn't
Yeah.
see a lot of, obviously, you get a lot of hate, but on the whole, the genuine fans really wanted Marco to do well and get big. Excuse me, get big and make it into the league. But yeah, listen, there's no shame in what he's done, and he's going to earn, like you say, he's going to earn some good money in Europe, and
Oh yeah.
hopefully continue to grow there. And listen, you never know, he's still young, so you never know, he may get another chance. We'll see. But the one thing I did want to touch on, there's been a lot of hype about Scoot Henderson going into the draft, and I know you were really high on him yourself as well. Um, Here was my thing with Scoot Henderson, and I get it, it's not all about stats, right? But Carlik Jones, 25, he's got age against him. He's only 6 foot. Scoot Henderson's only 6'2". It's not a massive difference, although he is only 19 years old. Carlik, in 24 games, 38 minutes. Scoot was 19 games, 30 minutes. Carlik had 26.1 points to Scoot's 16.5 points. Carlik was 48.2% from the field to Scoot's 42.9. 3 points. Carlik was 36% from 5.8 attempts. Scoot was, where are we? 27.5 off of 2.7 attempts. Scoot had 6.8 assists. Carlik had 7 assists. Carlik was MVP. Why is everyone so high on Scoot? And I'm not saying he's not going to be a superstar in this league, because he may well be, but when you just look at the numbers alone, Carlik's are not so much better, but they are. If you were going on stats alone, you would pick Carlik out of those two players, right? And I know it's not all about stats, but why is basically what I'm getting at is, why is there so much hype with Scoot?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that NBA teams are reluctant on guys that can't hold up physically. And Carlik is a more slender guy. He's probably 6 feet tops. I don't know. I think they list him at 6'1", but I don't know that he's
That's a
that.
stretch.
Yeah. When scouts look at Scoot Henderson, they see the possibility of perhaps a young Derrick Rose or a young Russell Westbrook, a guy who can use his physicality. He's very well developed in his upper body. He can bounce off contact. He can finish at the rim. He can push the ball in transition, and he has really good shooting form, better than Derek and Russell Westbrook at that age. So
Wow.
I'm not saying he's going to be as good as those two players were. I mean, obviously, Derrick Rose before his knee injury was the MVP of the league and looked like he was headed to a Hall of Fame career. Russell Westbrook is a top 75 player of all time. So, that's a lot to try to compare a young player to. But I think that when they evaluate a Scoot Henderson, they see those traits and the fact that he is strong physically and that he can finish through contact, whereas Carlik is more likely to get knocked off the ball, and his three-point shooting is good, but it's not exceptional. So, as I mentioned, when you're either a tweener or too small, you have to have one stat that really jumps out at somebody. And with Carlik, he scored at a very high clip. He was able to finish at the rim at the G League level, but a couple of games he did play with the Bulls, he struggled. There was one game in particular against Milwaukee. He got a really solid run because they had a number of injuries, and he was like the backup point guard. And he tried to get into the paint, and he was turning the ball over. And I attribute a lot of that to nerves. This was his one big opportunity.
Yeah.
But there's so much as an undersized player that you have to show a coaching staff and a front office in order to get one of those roster spots. Scoot Henderson may not live up to the hype, but I think that when they look at him, they project him as a guy that maybe he could be one of those really, really special point guards that can kind of put a team on his back and really take them to great places.
There you go. And that's why Mark does what he does, because he's talked me around straight away.
Well, there have been so many guys that have been picked in the top 5 in the draft that have not panned out. And, it's always difficult to project some of these players. They may do incredibly well in the NCAA tournament, and people think, well, when this guy gets on the pro level, he's going to dominate. And sometimes it just doesn't happen, especially with guys, that are guards, because there are so many good backcourt players in the NBA. It's really difficult to distinguish yourself. So we'll see what happens with Scoot Henderson and some of the other guys who were drafted. The Thompson twins showed a lot. The younger, well, not the younger one, the one who was drafted first, Amen Thompson, who was drafted by Houston at 4. He had a spectacular game until he turned his ankle in the first minute. And those kids are like 6'6", 6'7". They may turn out to surpass Scoot. We'll just have to see how things shake out over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, we certainly can't look into the future. Like you say, there's been a lot of busts picked in the top. Bust just sounds such a horrible word to use, but they certainly didn't reach up to their expectations, shall we say. So yeah, I'm excited to watch his career. Like I say, he's still young enough, and Wemby as well. I really hope Wemby can really turn it on and do well in this league, because he took a lot of unnecessarily stick in summer league. There's just too much hype on these players, in my opinion, and I think we forget that they're not robots, they're people, and most of them are very young people as well. And what was I doing at 19, 20 years old? I mean, if people were talking about me like that in the media, I'd probably, just sit in the corner and cry myself to sleep every night. So, I think we forget that too quickly. So I'm always rooting for these guys for sure, even despite the fact they're not playing for my team. I'm always rooting for them to prove the naysayers wrong. Hopefully they all can. But Mark, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this chat, and I really appreciate your time.
So you're planning to get back to Chicago anytime in the coming years?
I really want to get back. I honestly had the best time. It's my 40th next year, and basically the deal was, when I booked to go to Chicago, that was my bucket list dream trip, and my girlfriend's bucket list dream trip is to go to Uganda and see the mountain gorillas in their natural habitat. That's about £8,000 trip, so it's stupid money. So the deal was, I can go to Chicago, but the next big trip has to be that. I didn't expect to love Chicago as much as I did, as crazy as that might sound. I genuinely, as stupid as it sounds, feels like a second home in a really, really weird way. I met so many awesome people. I would love to get back for my 40th next year. I did dabble with the idea to my girlfriend, and she very quickly shut me down and reminded me that Uganda's next. So I
That's only fair.
Yeah, absolutely. That was part of the deal. And to be fair, she's awesome. She was so good to me about me going. I was gone for 9 nights on my own, just doing what I wanted. And she come to Paris with me as well. Even though she didn't particularly have any interest at all, she did it for me. So yeah, she's awesome. So it's only right I honour it. But I would love to get back. And actually, I'd love to come back for Balls Fest, which is in like 4 weeks' time. But
Yeah.
there's absolutely no chance. Shout out, I won't name them, but somebody messaged me about am I going to Balls Fest, and I said I wish if I win the lottery I'll be there. And they said all you got to do is get out here. You can stay with me at their place and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's crazy to me that someone 4,000 miles away, who's only been there once, is getting offers like that is crazy to me. And well, I don't want to keep rambling on about it. I feel like I talk about it every week, but obviously what happened with Will Perdue after that Windy City game, giving me a lift back to my hotel, that was just I just kind of summed up how friendly the people in Chicago were to me. And it's yeah, I actually weirdly get quite emotional when I talk about it because it's just so surreal.
Certainly beats that $75 Uber to get out to Hoffman Estates, right?
98, I think it was $98.
98?
Well, no, my one, because I got the train to, is it Rosemere? I think it's Rosemont. That's the one, Rosemont. I got the train to Rosemont, and then I had to get the taxi, which was about, I think it was about $50 from there. But to get the taxi from the Now Arena back to my hotel was, I think it was like $98 or something crazy, which I was just going to pay because I had an awesome time. And shout out to Brad from the Windy City Bulls, who really looked after me and gave me some awesome stuff. He's an awesome guy. Yeah, we've been in touch since. I've emailed him a bit as well. He's a great guy. So I was more than happy to spend the $98 just to get my stuff back safely. Because Will kind of said you can't get on that train back this time of night because you won't make it home with that stuff. So it was still so surreal to me that I was sat in a car with Will Perdue and yeah, it's crazy.
Well, it was a great experience, and I'm so glad that both Windy City and the Chicago Bulls treated you so well. That's fantastic.
They really did, and just the people of Chicago as a whole. I couldn't have asked for any more. So yeah, thank you to them, to the fans, to you, to everyone who gave me time, and yeah, it means it means more than anyone will ever know. Honestly, how friendly everyone was to me. I can't put into words how amazing it was. So yeah, and thank you to you, because I messaged you before the game and you said sure, come down to the scorers table and we'll meet and stuff. And yeah, it was just awesome. So yeah, thank you, and thank you for doing this as well. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. Best of luck with the show, and hopefully we've got a good season to talk about coming up.
Fingers crossed. Mark, just quickly shout out your handles and obviously the Gimme the Hot Sauce handle as well on the socials just before we go.
Yeah, my Twitter is just at Mark Schanowski. Schanowski is not the easiest to spell. SCHANOWSKI. And our podcast handle is Gimme the Hot Sauce Podcast. Gimme is GIMME. Gimme the Hot Sauce Podcast. And there's a 21 at the end of it on Twitter, because that was Stacy's first number. He wore 2 numbers with the Bulls.
Of course. So if
that was the second number, excuse me. You were 34 first, then 20.
21 after, yeah. So if you're not already following Mark and the Gimme the Hot Sauce podcast, what is wrong with you? Go and put that wrong right. And go and listen to the Gimme the Hot Sauce podcast as well, because it is absolutely brilliant. It's everything you would imagine it is. So yeah, go and check that out. Mark, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Guys, we'll be back soon with another episode. I've actually got Will Perdue coming on at some point. It's not penciled in a date yet, but he's going to come on and have a chat with us as well. So that should be in the next few weeks, hopefully. So yeah, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And until next time, go Bulls.